Hello and welcome to Capes and Tights, a pop culture and comic book podcast. I'm your co-host, Adam Morissette, and this is my co-host, Justin Soderberg.
What's up, guys?
So today we're going to be discussing the original 90s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies trilogy.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk movies. I mean, like I said, to you off air, is that we wanted to do this podcast to do like pop culture comic book stuff, but really movies, TV, all that kind of stuff too. And we thought we'd talk movie reviews, but I don't want to do them in the traditional way that some of these people do, where it's like, we like this movie, we give it an A+, or we give it a 68% or a 6.8 out of 10. I want to do these movie reviews as we liked it or not. Like, it's as simple as that. Because let's be honest, when I read on IMDb that something got a 7.2, I'm like, cool. That 7.2, a 6.8, 8.0 doesn't make a difference to me. That's in that, okay, you should watch that movie kind of realm. Whereas like a 4 or a 3 or a 2, I'd still probably watch the movie because I'm not like a person who just reads reviews and listens to things and just goes along with it. But I'd be more apt to like wait on that movie, or like, okay, if someone else wants to watch it with me kind of thing. And so I feel like reviews are always subjective. And so that it's not easy to just be like A+. I would just say, we recommend watching this movie. That's it. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do some stuff. We're going to talk Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies, the original movies. There's some ones that have come out later, which are not my favorite movies for sure. I think there's something about this original trilogy that just always draws me back into wanting to watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And even reading the comic books, Adam and I have read the comic books, the various versions of the comic books over the years. This in the animated shows and all that stuff. This is to me like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to me. Like when I was growing up, I mean, it's hate to say that on a comic book podcast that the movies were more me, but this is like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that I remember is these Jim Henson suits that they are animatronics and all that stuff. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to talk the first movie, the second movie, and the third movie. We'll touch on each one of them, and then we'll talk the whole trilogy as a whole. And then I want to give some input on like, I wish they would do some more that were like this at the end. So, but we can talk a little bit about that. So want to just dive right in, or do you want to?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
No,
so
I think let's just.
Let me start off with the first movie and just give I'll do a breakdown on the first movies or movies when they came out. So the first movie, did it come out in 89 or 90?
I believe it came out at the very end of 89. Although it is listed as 90 on here, but I read a couple places that it was actually right at the end of 89. But let's say 90. That's okay. I see that on here. So I think that's
90. Okay. Maybe it was really like they were scheduled to be released earlier than that. Whatever. It's 1990. So let's go 1990, the original movie. It's Rotten Tomatoes score of 40%. So the Rotten Tomatoes score is the critics score of what they give it on there, but there's an audience score of 81%, which makes a little bit more sense. I mean, critically, I can understand why they put the movie at 40%. Sure. But audience score, again, it hits like, and it's probably that Rotten Tomatoes came out obviously way after the first movie came out. So if you think about when someone's rating the movie, when they go on to Rotten Tomatoes nowadays, you're rating it not only on the movie, but you're rating it on a nostalgic factor. Like,
oh, absolutely.
Right now we're in a nostalgic world that we all love old stuff. And so giving it a higher score, knowing that this is the original movie, is probably has something to do with it. It's a 6.8 on IMDb, which is another ratings website you can go to. The movie was made for $13.5 million, but Adam and I, we watched this documentary on it too, but the budget originally was supposed to be like 10 or something like that, but they ended up upping it to 13.5, but it made $200 million. Yeah. So it doesn't really matter what the movie was made for at that point. The second movie came out in 91. We'll just go on this one really quickly. And then 35% critics, 67% audience, 6.0 on IMDb. $25 million budget, made 78.6. And the third movie came out in 93, and that's 22%, 34%, 4.8, and $21 million budget, and only made 54.5. So just that right alone tells you a little bit about how these movies went. Yeah. But we can dive a little bit into a little bit more now with the first movie and so on.
Yep. So yeah, the first movie, I mean, right for what you said, I mean, as we're giving it a review now doesn't work because in 1990, I was 11 years old. This movie coming out, and honestly is like some of like my first real excited memories of a film. And I know that if you ask 1990 me, I would say no greater film will ever be made.
Yes.
And that's it. So, like you said, that's where reviews don't necessarily work. Because I think, to me, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1 stood up really well.
Yes.
I
100%. So that's one of the things I'll get into, and we can do is we'll do each movie. But if we have a relation to the other movies, I think what I'll say in the relation that one out of the 2 and 3, one stood the stand of the time that stood the whatever that saying is, stood the test of time, stood the test of time. Yeah. Whereas number 2 and number 3 aged way more than the first movie did.
Yes.
I think, but part of it is because I think the first movie, it's almost like if they made that movie in 2021 that way, it'd be like paying homage to the early 90s, late 80s.
Right.
Whereas the second movie and the third movie were like, well, the third movie obviously is traveling through time, so it's a little bit different. But the second and the third movie were almost like you could tell those movies were made in the 90s. And so there's that difference on the three of them. And you mentioned some things on our Slack too that you can get into about the various you can tell when the movies were made. But I think the first movie, here's my biggest thing. Love the suits. I'll always love their suits they're wearing.
Without a doubt.
Their fake turtle suits. Jim Henson, his team was the one that actually made those suits. They have
crazy
cables in the back of the necks that made the mouth move. And there was mentioning on that documentary about how there was like they were at a place where their airplanes would go by and the mouths would move randomly. And it's funny because they're all made by radio control. And obviously, again, that's back in the early 90s, or obviously was filmed in the late 80s. That technology was at the very beginning. If they could even do it better now. So the fact that they keep on going CGI to me is like, make CGI, if you're going to do CGI, look like these turtles. The way they make the new movies, they make them look so weird and so, I don't know, not like turtles.
Right.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I should say. But the fact of the matter is that those suits are like that, and they can jump around, they can move in them, and they looked real to us as kids. Was fascinating. So I'll always say that the first movie suits were unbelievable. And I'll always stand by and say they should have always done it that way, even if they could have done CGI then. I'm glad they did that.
And Justin and I had just watched this documentary too, which was talking a bit about the suits and how they worked. And today I was reading an article, or yesterday, and a quote by Jim Henson I hadn't seen on the movie, but he was really reluctant to come in just because of his whole image and if this was too dark. But he was quoted as saying when they asked him to do that project, at the time for him, the only way to make one of like these shows successful with creatures was there always had to be a new technology that was behind it to make it look cooler and cooler. And he was like, then I came to like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and they wanted 9 technological innovations to make these suits at the same time. And so I think even from whether it stands up, listening to him say that, man, like that shows you how complicated they were. I mean,
and they had to make flips in it. The technology of actually making the mouths move in a way that you believe that they're actually talking to you. And watching the first movie, I had no problem thinking that the turtle themselves were speaking. Like that, there was no delineation between that it's a robot. And I think through the entire first movie, I was like, okay, I can understand Raphael speaking. But this, and going on to, we'll talk about the second and third, as it progressed through the movies, you got less and less okay with that. And maybe that's the similar thing with, as technology moved, that they didn't move as much in those movies.
Right.
But it was just fascinating to see that they can actually have this technology of that and flip and do these things and do all this stuff in these suits that are like heavy and annoying. I mean, on that documentary we watched, I guess a couple people got sick in the suit because it was so hot in there, and people were flipping and not eating and all that stuff. And that the cables went down the back so much that when they took the helmets off to breathe, someone had to hold them behind them because they couldn't just set them down, and taking the suits off took too long. So it was like they had these suits almost like it was like a head and then this, and then there was the other part where they talked about when the suits were taken off, they'd put them over some sawhorses and then leave.
They built a bunch of sawhorses,
and there was just like these really weird, like looking like they're dead turtles on these sawhorses when they walked in the room. That would have been creepy as hell. But the suits themselves, like that's the whole point. Like I said, the first movie, it was the only real movie that was like this at the time. And I will always say that, again, that stood the test of time. I think if they would have made that movie tomorrow the same exact way, I would be very excited to see that movie. And it's, again, I'm just speaking on the suits at this moment. We're obviously getting into some more things in there, but like the suits themselves are believable to the point where I can't. And again, the movie was made for more like teenagers than it was
Sure.
kids. But I mean, people would believe that those are real turtles. I honestly think that you'd think, oh, those are actual real turtles that are human beings.
I just said my mind was blown. I remember it clearly. And I think that the whole first movie, like you said, it's just like I said again, if anyone hasn't seen this documentary, well, it was Turtle Power.
Turtle Power, the definitive history of yeah, I think it's what it's called, Turtle
Yeah,
Power.
it was really good. But I think seeing that, just what an absolute number of people were involved in making that first movie happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes from those kind of beginnings of nobody wants to take it seriously to even the people that do are taking a gamble. But I think in the end, it makes such a good movie. And a lot of it is because you can tell that that Eastman and Laird still had their fingers on it a lot. Big time. And from what the documentary showed and stuff I've read, they were very reluctant for a lot of the changes that were being suggested. And you can see that. And for those of us, that grew up reading the comic books, the first movie has some actual framed shots from the original comic book. That's just makes the whole thing, to me, that movie just a kind of a time capsule. And it's so perfect because it's everything I remember wrapped up in one movie.
It's fascinating to me that the fact that you mentioned that it's direct from the comic book. The other funny thing is that the movie was only made 6 years after the first comic book was released, and the first issue was 3,000 issues. They've done like 6 or 7 printings since then, but it's the fact that they were able to go from comic book drawing release to a feature film in 6 years. Yeah. Also baffles me that nothing moves that fast in Hollywood anymore.
No,
I mean, the Invincible TV show that Robert Kirkman just put out on Amazon Prime, is that comic book came out years and years and years. I mean, well times ago, like long time ago, 10 years ago. And it's still just now got an animated show on a streaming service. The fact that a feature film was able to be produced and made and released to the world and be that successful off of a comic book that was made 6 years prior. And obviously we're talking the movies, the live action movies. Obviously we have to respect and know that the Playmates toys and the animated show that came out in conjunction with the Playmates toys is really what sold this movie to Hollywood itself and to people.
Yes.
And so people wanted to see it. But back then it's like the Turtles were a comic book, a toy, and an animated show. Very rarely do people want to do that into a real life movie. The fact that they even took the time and risk to make an actual movie, like a real life people movie, is fascinating to me, and that it did that well in the theaters. $200 million in 1990 is a lot of money for a movie. Like,
well, it's like I remember the hype so clearly, and it's like I said, even the documentary, you can't recapture those moments. Like that movie was the biggest damn thing ever to kids. And and like you said, probably into the teenage years, and that's was smart with that kind of dark aspect to it. I think brought that crowd in. But like, man, like you said, the fact that it even happened is crazy. The fact that they pulled it off with that level of quality in the late 80s and then release it in 90 blows my mind. I mean,
and it obviously we're talking right now. The movie's not perfect in any stretch of the imagination. There is also, you cannot, when we talk about these movies and these reviews, we're going to do other ones too that are trilogies or the entire concept of the movies, is that we're relating and talking about them as they are in relation to them to the other movies they are. I mean, obviously this is not Shawshank Redemption, or like it's not these movies, it's not Schindler's, it's not those movies. It is not also a $1 billion Infinity War movie. Like it's not the same. This is the 90s. But if you think about $200 million box office in 1990, I mean, there's movies nowadays that don't bring that much money in, and that's tickets are twice as much. It's twice as expensive. They're readily available. There's more theaters, all that stuff. Like the fact that they made $200 million off of a $13.5 million budget was tremendous. Unbelievable. And that said, the movies themselves weren't perfect. There's definitely some fun things that I wanted to point out too, is that the sewer layer is amazing. The way they set it up and all that stuff is awesome. On all the movies. The funny one, my favorite thing in the first movie, just the fun things, were the fact that Casey Jones didn't recognize that Raphael was a turtle when he was fighting in the park, and he was wearing a hat, and then the hat falls off, and they're like, "Oh my god, what are you?" And it's the funniest thing because I'm like, it's like the Clark
Yeah.
Kent of Superman thing, where
Oh
it's
yeah.
like when his glasses are on, you don't know he's Superman, but when his glasses are off, all of a sudden out of nowhere, you know he's Superman. The same thing with Raphael. You didn't know he was a giant turtle with a hat on and a trench coat, but the second his hat falls off, you're like, "What the hell is that?" It's
Which
like if
really,
oh my god, I'm a completely different
I
person.
know.
It's this.
But like at its core, that's such the brilliance of the whole turtle thing from the
Yes.
beginning is like the whole like fact in the comics again, if you've read them, but the movie, if you haven't, does such a good job, is like they really take like their training seriously and being ninjas. They are turtles. That is the
Yes.
dumbest thing ever, but it works. And like I said, I think that just kind of the whole series works like that because it's like you said, like you don't even have to worry anymore about why nobody thinks Raphael's a turtle because he has a trench coat on. He's a talking ninja turtle. Like,
Yes.
and I
Exactly.
think that's fun. It's that stuff we talk about of like, I don't always want to think too deep
Yes.
about why this works. It just works, and I like it.
And you know, like I said, the fact that the turtles, that's my turtles, and like I said, this is gonna go. I'm part of the Ben Bishop's Bish Kids group, and we have a Discord that we
Yep.
talk on and stuff like that. And I'm probably, I mean, some of those people might listen to this podcast, and I don't want to get ostracized for this, but it's like obviously the turtles comic books are a big thing in the world. That's where it started.
Mm-hmm.
And so on. But like I said, this is my turtles from growing up. This is what got me
Absolutely.
into Ninja Turtles. I obviously wasn't reading. I mean, I grew up in New England, so I could have potentially stumbled upon an issue number one of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I wish I did now because one just sold for almost $250,000. But this was my combo, and the same thing. This is my Casey Jones. Casey Jones for all of eternity is going to be Elias Koteas, who played at Casey Jones in this movie. That's who it's going to be to me. That's Casey Jones. When I picture him, the long hair,
Yep.
Elias in that movie is great. However, did you know that Christian Slater, Johnny Depp, and Keanu Reeves were all considered for the role of Casey Jones? That is,
Well, dang.
can you
Yeah.
imagine how different of a film this would have been if
Oh man.
Johnny Depp was Casey Jones?
Honestly, yeah, I don't
I mean,
like
Christian
any
Slater, I
of
could have
them as
seen.
Casey.
Christian Slater
Yeah.
was the 90s. He's that thing. But Johnny Depp and Keanu Reeves' careers have gone so much further now that I'm
Oh
wondering if
gosh.
the trajectory of their careers would have been different if he was in this movie, or it would have been better or worse. But just think about
Yep.
Jack Sparrow from freaking, in Edward Scissorhands as Casey Jones. That's just the funny,
Yeah.
like it just made me laugh. It freaking Matrix, Keanu Reeves is in the Matrix and John Wick movies. He was Casey Jones. And we live in a different
Oh
world, I
God.
believe, and it's funny. It's
I
just
feel like for where Keanu Reeves was then, that would have been the
yeah,
worst casting ever because he would have
exactly.
had to have been like, "What, dude? What's up?" And that would have been way too much of that right off the bat. I thought,
Elias play is perfect.
I thought he was great. I mean, again, and actually something you just said that I think is huge is like I talk about the Turtles comics a lot too. So but full disclosure, I mean, I'm really getting into the Turtles with the cartoon
Mm-hmm.
originally. And when it first comes out, I'm probably 8, 7. I'm trying to do the math, but doesn't matter,
Yep.
close enough. And so for me, it was like the comic, and then the cartoon. I had also seen the comics, and so I started getting the like collected editions and reading through them. So really, though, like the movie is where most people really buy into this. The comics now I like to talk about, but like you said, they were a very niche group of people that were finding these and reading these. So yeah, it's the movie. The cartoon even was fantastic, but that movie just like it brought everybody to the comics and the cartoon.
And back then too, in the 90s, I don't know if people aren't huge toy / comic book animated show 90s people like we are, is
right.
A lot of the things that were created in the 90s that you see on the toy shelf or comic books related to them were animated shows first. And that's how they sold toys. There wasn't advertising. Yes. It wasn't like, here's a big ad on TV. There was, but like that wasn't it. Their advertising was, let's put a 6-episode animated series on TV that kids want to watch on Saturday morning. And then they go to their parents and say, for Christmas, I want the 4 Turtles from Playmates. That's how they sold things. That's why they even got on TV, is that they got a deal with Playmates, but Playmates is like, the only way we're going to sell these toys is if we make an animated show to go with it. And the success of both the toy line, the animated series, and then obviously the comic book was what they made the movie based off of. So, but as this is great to see the opposite, in a sense that it moves so fast that a live action movie, I mean, was made 6 years and it was of this success, like this amazingness, and
Yep.
which then fueled number two. I'm going to get in number two in a second. But I wanted a couple more things I wanted to lie.
Yep.
I love the scene where Casey Jones, we're in the old house and Casey Jones is cutting the veggies with his sword. That's my favorite. Like I was like looking at it, I'm like, there's knives. There's got to be knives there somewhere or something. But he's just like this massive sword, and he's just like.
That's why he pulls off that character so well, because the whole thing is you're like, where do you live? What are you? Who are you? And so, like, of course, he chops everything with his sword. He probably does it at home too. Like,
which makes me sad, because I really wish they go back into his backstory. I wish there was I would love a Casey Jones movie. Honestly, Jones is one of my favorite Turtles characters of all time.
Honestly, a Casey Jones movie now with Elias playing an older Casey Jones with what's going on too in the comics now would be fantastic. Or make a series. Awesome.
Yes.
I mean, give
a dark one.
That would a very dark one. Like,
because I love what they portrayed him as, Casey Jones as, in the newer comic book series as well, and so on. So, and obviously in the Last Ronin series, Casey Jones is a different character, but not in a different character, which actually drops today when this episode releases. Number 4 comes, Last Ronin number 4 comes out as well. So go pick that up if you can, or read that series, which is really good. The only other thing I would say about the first one that didn't work very well with me, the Foot Clan just looked weird. Like the suits, I don't know. I know there's a reasoning behind it and all that, but like, I don't know. I just feel like that was the one where it was just like, they looked like bug-eyed, weird. I don't know. It was just weird. And obviously, also how they found that many people who know martial arts in New York City at once that quickly that want to be underground Foot Clan people also surprised me.
And I would say that's fair. If I was going to give a big criticism of the first one, it would be that for as much work as they put into really bringing the Turtles to life, the Foot Clan and Shredder, honestly, just kind of suck.
Yeah.
I mean, like, by the time they build up Shredder at the end, like the fact that they can't just beat him up and be done doesn't compute, because I'm like, there's no way the 4 of you can't do this.
Yes.
You know, but so that's just maybe bad character building. But
and that's also one of those things where sometimes studios have more of a say than the actual creators do, even though we know that Eastman and Laird were created and involved in this movie. The fact that the studios are still like, we're going to do this, and this is a perfect segue into the second movie, Secret of the Ooze, that came out in 1991, is the fact that Eastman and Laird didn't want Shredder to be the villain in number 2, because they were done. Here's also the funny thing is, and you look at comic books, and you look at things, and these people who are like big villains that come onto the TV shows and so on. Like in The Walking Dead, for example, Negan was the villain for a very long time, even though he was only in the Walking Dead comic books for a short period of time. Same thing with the governor and so on. The same thing at Shredder. In the original series, the Mirage series of Shredder dies in issue 1.
Right.
So like the fact that he's in 2 movies is like, okay, come on. We're past this. Let's go on. And then Eastman and Laird were both like, we have tons of great villains we could use.
Well, and the cartoon had already...
Yes.
The cartoon had beat Shredder to death. I mean, every week was Shredder, Krang, Bebop, Rocksteady.
And you're talking about, the reason I'm saying I'm trying to transition this together is the suit for Shredder in number 2 was even worse than he was in the first. Like his getup, his clothing was even worse in the second one than he was in the first one.
This is a great point for transition, because I have a lot to say about Shredder in the second movie.
Yes, I love Shredder's, like, I love the character. He was in one of my top favorite villains of all time, just because of who he is as a character. But like I said, there's one of those, you know, they planned it in the Marvel Infinity Saga that the big bad the entire time was Thanos. However, they had small bads that they had to beat in each movie. There was some sort of bad villain character they had to beat. It just seemed like the first 2 movies, it was like there's no other bad people out there. I mean, obviously Toka and Razor, obviously in this movie, are the villains as well. But they're just offspring of Shredder in a sense, that were, you know, not in anything else before ever. They were created because they couldn't use Bebop and Rocksteady due to some confusion on who owned the rights to them. But like the fact that they used the same villain in both movies just was like, okay, this is not a TV show. A 6-part miniseries, you can have the same villain, but like this is a separate movie. There should be a different villain you have to go after.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, one of the problems that has always weighed this series down is just like they too early on, they solidified these kind of, it worked in the cartoons because Shredder was just a goof in the cartoons, but that doesn't work anywhere else. But as you said, great. As we know, Shredder was not done in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie one.
Yes.
So that brings us to two. I'll let you start talking about two. I get worked up about two.
Well, so in the long run, so there's certain scenes in number two that stick up to me. So you know, how, like obviously you watch all three in a row, and most of the time since you were younger. Now, when you watch one, you do watch all of them. It's part of the reason why I watch trilogy movies or movies that have multiple ones is that you put one in and you get to watch. Oh, let's watch the second one. You get all excited to watch the second one and so on. Even if they're bad, you still go on and watch the rest of them.
Exactly.
When I watch the Star Wars, a lot of times if I watch a random Star Wars movie, I'm like, screw this, and you put all the Star Wars movies on, you watch them all. That's just how you do it. And so Secret of the Ooze, there's certain scenes, like the scene of them actually seeing the tube of ooze for the first time and the video game quotes, like where do you put the quarters and all that stuff. Like that stuff reminds me of, as a whole series of movies, memories of the movies. But there was a big drop off from number one to two, but I still think that it's worth watching. Like you have to watch this movie to know this whole thing.
Yep.
Suits, the turtle suits themselves were similar from the first one. Again, still Jim Henson, who originally wasn't going to do this series due to the violence in the first movie. And that's my biggest downfall in the second movie. When the first movie came out, it was darker, a little bit grittier. There was this tonal aspect of it, where the second one got a little bit more bubbly, and they actually have said it out loud in interviews that it was purposely done that because they wanted to be more of a family-friendly movie.
Yes, without a doubt.
There is no weapons in this movie besides the bow staff, due to it making it more family-friendly movie. So the idea that they wanted to make it more family-friendly, which was, I understand, it's Turtles, it's animated show, was for kids and da-da-da-da. But the original comic books were dark, gritty.
Oh, yeah.
They were not made for kids. They were made for...
My mom would not have let me read them when I first started reading them if she knew what was in them. Because my mom, like many parents, we had the Comics Code Authority, and if I bought Marvel, it was, it's going to be pretty decent. This was not decent for children. Mm-hmm. Although I thought it was. So, and I turned out right.
But there's definitely things in there where it's just like, come on, like I understand this. Plus, the ooze is bright green in that scientific lab part. But then when Shredder goes to put the ooze into Toka and Razor's cage, it looks like it been mixed with white liquid. It looks like barely green ooze, and I'm like,
it's like cereal milk. Yeah.
Yes, like ooze to me is bright green ooze. Like, come on, like that's the way you should
ridiculously bright.
This. Plus, I mean, also the turtle's fingers are massive, and he's typing on the keyboard to try to find which vial is still there, and he's pressing buttons. I'm like, he'd be pushing so many different keyboard buttons right now with those big fat fingers. Again, I'm as an adult looking at 35-year-old adult, I'm looking at it as a more realistic thing. And obviously this is not a realistic thing. There's no such thing as real turtles that are that big, but I just laugh as I'm watching them. I'm like, what the hell's wrong with that?
Yeah, no, the second movie was like, again, like you said, if you're watching them back to back, it's a bit jarring out of the gate. Yes. Like it's maybe not, if you've been watching the cartoons, it feels a bit like that. It's real, like it's one-liners and zingers and physical comedy and all of that. And once I like stopped and like, again, reminded myself that I'm now 41 years old and I think differently about these things and I can actually think about it in context. The second one, was it as good as the first? I don't think so at all, but it was fun. I mean, I think I even texted you, like the whole Vanilla Ice thing redeemed the whole movie for me because it was so ridiculous. And so at that point I was like, okay, everything that's been done is now acceptable.
Yes.
Because they just danced on stage with Vanilla Ice. But before we get there, the next thing I mean is Taka and Razor.
Yeah. Oh God. That's it. Okay.
Talk about
put them in a separate context. And you just take a picture of them and look at this and like, this is cool from a 1990s movie. Like those are pretty badass looking characters. Like this, like cool looking, but in relation to what they should have been in this movie were random. It just was like to this point where it was like, Bebop and Rocksteady. Obviously we know, and we can look back on it in hindsight's 2020 and so on. They weren't able to use Bebop and Rocksteady. Right. Nowadays, if there was Bebop and Rocksteady, I think it would have been redeemed the entire movie. This movie might actually been better than the first movie in that sense.
I remember clearly at the time everybody was so excited that the second movie was probably going to have Bebop and Rocksteady. And when they announced it and it was these new things, I remember my friends, everybody was like, I'm out.
Yep.
And I don't want to learn some new weird characters. Like, so I think that hurt it a lot.
It did. And the fact that they're fighting I don't know. The Vanilla Ice thing is fun. That one made me like, okay, you redeemed the entire movie in a sense, because also I found out afterwards, that Ninja Rap was written in 30 minutes.
I believe it.
Vanilla Ice just put it out there and was like, Ninja Rap. And the guy behind the scenes, the producer of the concert, and he's like, call the police. And the guy comes over with the phone and was like, the police are on the phone. What are you talking about? Get away from me. They love it. I was like, this is so like, it was fun aspect of it. And the turtles dancing and people standing in there. That part was fun for sure. One of the things I will say that makes this movie again drop down, and I know you agree with me on this, is that Judith Hoag wasn't in it. That they replaced April O'Neil with a different person. And the reason that is because she didn't like the first movie. She wasn't a fan of what her part was, all the things that were cut out from what she was supposed to be saying in the first movie and so on and so forth. She didn't like the way it was portrayed. And so she backed herself out. I laugh now. Comic-Con's coming up in Bangor and she's going to be there representing, is that she's made a living off of that movie. So like, I laugh the fact that she didn't want to do 2 and 3, and maybe it was her best interest. She was in the best one. She was in the best movie and she just said, you know what, peace out. I don't want to do the rest of them. The rest of them are going to suck. Like, she might've redeemed herself by not being in the other 2. April O'Neil in the sequel and in the third movie, she's a pretty good character. She's not horrible. I didn't even write her name down in the notes because I don't care, because Judith Hoag is my April O'Neil, and
without a doubt,
real life, because April O'Neil in the animated show is also seared in my mind of just what she looks like and who she is. But yeah, the April O'Neil thing, and then Elias, they didn't put Casey Jones in this movie again
at all, and not a mention of it.
No, and that's the weirdest part. It's like all of a sudden I know he wasn't there. He was there in first episode season, first show or first TV movie. The second the second movie he's not in, and all of a sudden I know where he's just in the third movie. Like nothing's gone wrong. Like he just shows up. Like where was he? Where have you been?
I was about to say,
we went through all this crap with finding out our origin story kind of thing. And where were you? Like,
and he walks in and I think it's like Donatello or something. And he's like, oh, hey, we haven't seen you for a long time. Yeah. And he's like, oh yeah. And that's it. That's the explanation for like, he's just been busy.
Okay. And they had Ernie Reyes be the replacement of him. He's not Casey Jones, obviously. He's what's his name in the movie? I forget his name in the movie. Friggin' starts with a K.
I got it right here. It starts with the K. It's about what I got for you. And he was another character though that he just wasn't real strong in that movie, and I don't really know what they wanted him to be.
It was Keno.
That's right. I just got it up right.
So here they wanted him to be a replacement in a sense to Casey Jones, but here's my thought process on it. When I was younger, when I saw Secret of the Ooze for the first time, loved him. Like it was he was like, oh, cool. This guy's cool. He's edgy. He's fun. Sure. He does the trips, the flips and tricks. He's young. He's making jokes. He had a bunch of one-liners and one saying things that were just like, but as I get older and rewatch the movie, and like I said, number one kind of stands the test of time, whereas number two really doesn't, is that like, okay, now they just fall him to death. Okay, come on. Again with the joke.
Yep.
Again with the thing. Come on. Like, let's just move on. The funny thing is that Ernie Reyes, who played Keno in the second movie, actually did the stunts in one of the turtle suits in first movie.
Yes.
So it's funny how he actually was in the first movie, but not as Keno. He was in the second movie. And that whole opening sequence with them flipping and the mall area with him like going to call. He knows martial arts and all this stuff really well, but he goes and calls the police before defending him. It was this weird thing, and then he comes back and they're all stacked up and And I love how the turtles pay for the pizza. They didn't just take the pizza; they paid for it. That was pretty funny. But yeah, Casey Jones would have been a great character in this. They could have easily done this movie with Casey Jones in it. Like, I don't understand why they didn't do it.
And I think this is second because it's the one I'm thinking of specifically. But like saw this documentary, and for anybody listening, fun facts. One of the things that just absolutely blew my mind was apparently the United Kingdom went to war on using the word ninja, any depiction of ninja. Like I dug more into it after the documentary, and to the point where like if you saw something that was ninja
Yeah.
and didn't say something, like that was quasi illegal. So they had to be the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles,
Yeah.
and they still, I think, are to this day officially. But for Secret of the Ooze, they had to edit out the scene with him using the sausages as weapons because they were too similar to nunchucks. And while they hated all weapons, nunchucks were right out, man.
Yeah.
Like they hated them. So that little thing came out in the documentary, and when I saw the Secret of the Ooze, I was just like, that's amazing.
I will preface or go back on saying there was no weapons with the bow staff. They do have the size in
Yes.
the in April's apartment that he stabs the pizza with, but that's like they don't actually use the weapons in actual fighting.
Exactly.
And the same thing with the nunchucks. So obviously he's using them, but he's not using nunchucks because they didn't want to have weapons in this film. Which again, to me was like, I understand no guns, and we'll get into that in episode or in movie 3, but like I understand that aspect of it, but I'm like, come on, they're Ninja Turtles. Like, come on, they have they have these weapons. I like
Right.
it just was
It's
weird to
literally
me.
what they are. Yeah.
And that was the weird, bow staff, and it was just making it more friendly. The other one was cool was, how Corey Feldman was in the first movie as one of the turtles. He's also in the third movie as one of the turtles, but he wasn't in this movie. Do you know why he wasn't in this movie?
I don't.
He was in rehab.
I believe that.
The first movie, he was like on his whole cocaine and heroin, time. And during the second movie, because it was filmed not that long afterwards, the success of the first movie, and so he was in rehab, so he couldn't actually be in there. But they brought him back for the third movie, to do, his stuff in the third movie. And
I guess if he had to miss one of them.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, he should have just gone to rehab for both of them, right? I mean, they're both the second and the third movie. He could have been a Judith Hogue aspect of that, of just knowing.
That's true. Yeah.
Maybe his life would have been different. No, his life definitely wouldn't have been different.
No.
The other things are like the sunflower, not the sunflower, the dandelion going big, reminding me a lot of like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, when he breaks off the dandelion in the cleanup of the ooze area.
Yep.
But yeah, the second movie to me again still is one of those movies that I'll if I had a choice to be like, okay, you can watch 2 of them, it's gonna be 1 and 2. But I've probably forced myself to watch number 3. There's something that still, even though a movie is horrible, there's something that still stands out for me, number 3, that we can get into in a second. But there's something that makes me go, I really like that movie still, even though it's bad. It's just there's something to say about it. I mean, I'm a big fan of National Treasure, and a lot of people hate that movie. I watched number 1 and number 2, and people hate that movie. So there is something that you still can force yourself to watch bad movies because you have this either nostalgic reason to them or something specifically that draws out that makes you watch it. But number 2, again, I didn't get as much of a love when it first came out in the theaters. Obviously, it didn't make as much money. It made less than half of what the first movie made. But it definitely still stands up for me to be like, okay, this is definitely worth watching. It definitely aged itself. It's not the same as number 1 where it can stand the test of time, but it's still worth watching, in my opinion.
And no, I absolutely agree. It is. I mean, it was like, it ended up being way more fun than I thought. It just wasn't, I think, what people were expecting that quick out of the gate from the first movie, which is, before we transition, that I don't know why when Shredder falls in the ooze, all of the metal grows too. Like
the same thing. And this is something else I want to remind myself to write myself a little note here to talk about in the third movie. There's something else that happens to someone like that, similar to that, that everything on his body grew, not just him. And so it was the weird thing is if it would have been that he would have been naked because nothing would have fit him anymore.
Right. Well, but also like, and it just was like, I mean, it was dumb by the time that like his spikes were this, like 2 feet long off his shoulder. Like, so.
And also that he took him that long to get rid of them, and he gets the ooze, and now he dies instantly by a thing falling on him.
As Super Shredder.
Yeah. Like Super Shredder was easier to beat than non-Super Shredder.
Yeah.
It was almost like they didn't even need that whole thing. Like they didn't need the aspect of having that Super Shredder. Nope. What was the point? Was the point originally that they were going to try to use him again in the third movie as Super Shredder?
Exactly. I wonder, or if it was just a fun toy because it's a big giant spiky shredder. I mean, I don't know, but no, 2 was great though. I really enjoyed it. I would.
And one last thing on 2 is my favorite voice of any of the turtles in all three movies was Robbie Rist's voice of Michelangelo in the first or the second movie. I think that he had a cool tone of voice, and it made me want to watch him. And he had that fun, like that separation from the other turtles that's there. And they did it on purpose, like, you know, the intelligence, some of, you know, the idea they had each individual voices that were actually recognizable different voices. But Michelangelo in number 2 was my favorite voice out of all three movies.
Yes.
And so my favorite character is Casey Jones out of all three movies, but like in the first movie, but the Michelangelo's voice in the second movie is my favorite. But going into the third movie, the biggest setback in number 3, it came out in 1993, was the suits. The turtle suits they went from Henson stopped doing it.
Yep.
And a company called the All Effects Company took over.
Yep.
And they went way too far into the animated look of the characters. The mouths didn't move correctly. The mouths were real.
Terrible.
It was a whole thing. One of the scenes that I remember seeing was something that you'd see differently in a current production of this movie, is that the ability to take the animatronic suits and match it with CGI is to correct things, is that there's scenes where you can see the neckline of where the head separates from the suit. And it's like in a modern technology movie, they would have CGI'd that out. So you would have the suit, but they do a mixture of the two, and that's what would have been fixed. But it's like, it was like, as the progression of Power Rangers, the TV show, progressed, it was like the villains had like stuffing hanging out of their shirts, and no one gave a shit. And that's what happened. I feel like in this movie, it was like, okay, we're doing all this stuff. We got a $21 million budget. We're hoping to make the money back. We're just going to go the cheaper company with LFX company. I don't know the whole story of why Henson didn't do it anymore. Because obviously Jim Henson passed away at some point, but his company is still doing stuff. And the suits just became plain bad. And that, before I forget, that connection to the first one about the shredder thing is when they go back in time. So they have that time traveling device. Now I forget the name of it, was the staff of Ra. No, they go back in time and they switch places. So like the guy comes to New York wearing the jean jacket or the leather jacket that April O'Neil was wearing. And so when they transition time, for some reason, her headphones and Walkman go with her.
Yes.
Right. But nothing else did. Right. And then when they transition and the turtles go back in time, they have suits and masks that fit them. Like the turtles are big, massive, thicker individuals, and they have face masks that fit their turtle face and a helmet that fits their turtle head.
Yep. Which is funny. I only picked that out because I thought they were doing that. They were really hitting hard with the, like, it must be whether or not you weigh exactly the same as the other person, which is, right when they said it, I was like, well, that's a dumb rule for the time travel. And then, like you said, then I was like, oh, that still doesn't work. Because like you said, these are custom built turtle samurai suits.
Yes. Like it's like, how the hell did that happen? And no one questions that at all. And it's like, obviously time travel is not real. So this is obviously all fake. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles aren't real. But the idea that was like, if you want to make it more realistic, they'd go back in time and they'd be naked. They wouldn't fit in their clothes. They'd stretch out of their clothes and it'd all be ripped and you'd have to find things. And obviously it's not a very fun thing for a teenage person to watching this movie to see them knit together some outfits that fit them. So obviously just skipping that and just being like, whatever. But it just like made me laugh. And the fact that nothing else went back and forth except for the Walkman and and what's his face? The guy who switched places with April O'Neil, his sword went through. Yep. His sword ended up transitioning in time too. Those are the kind of just funny things. I'm like, what the hell is going on right now with this?
Yes.
Like, and then Taylor made a point too. And she said, maybe it's because they didn't want that they knew the mouth moving was bad and they wanted less scenes with the mouths moving. So they had the masks on. They didn't have to worry about it anyway. But then like 5 minutes after they transitioned back in time, the mask came off and they were out without masks most of the time they were there. So it's just plain bad. And that might be the fall of the entire, they might have done a fourth movie if it looked as good as the first and second movie.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, that's 93. I mean, I'm trying to think when Turtles really starts losing steam, but it's around there that it starts really losing that cultural grip that it has. And like you said, I think you're right. Third movie probably piled on the straws on that one. Because it was not great.
And because it is loosely based off of issues 46 and 47 of the Mirage comic book days of time travel. But so there is this connection. So the movie's if you look at the overall story, just if I told you right now, I read you the synopsis of this movie, you don't want to watch it. You'd be like, I want to watch this movie. turtles traveling through time, swapping places, not just traveling through time, but swapping places with people. So those you have to deal with the fish out of water kind of aspect in New York City with these people that are from the past, and the same thing in the opposite way. But you also could see what was coming the second they got back in time, and there was these connections and relationships starting. You're like, they're not going to want to go back. You can see it. I was like, I could see the writing on the wall immediately. I'm like, they're not going to want to go back to the future because of what they're going through in the past. Like they're going to want to be there to help protect people and so on. And you could just see that the writing on the wall. And obviously towards the end, two of the turtles were like, no, we want to stay.
Right.
And I was like, but then I was looking back to the beginning of the movie. I'm like, but was it Donatello say that they'd be turtle soup if they didn't come back within a certain number of days? And I didn't know if that was because they couldn't come back after a certain number of days or they would die. Yeah. And then at the end of the movie, it was like, we're going to stay. It's like, well, that's not how it works. At the beginning of the movie, they said you couldn't do that.
Right.
So there's a bunch of plot holes in it. But again, as I go about as an overall arching thing, I'll just say before, if you want to jump in here, is the storyline behind it, the fact that it's not in New York City, that they went somewhere else to do it, which is pretty cool.
And Japan was a brilliant choice of where to go. I mean,
it's ninjas. It makes sense. Like,
it's ninjas and Japanese culture in our pop culture is ripping at that point. So like everything about it made sense. It's just the execution wasn't real great. Oh, and the Turtles in Time video game.
Yes.
I mean, that was all the rage.
Yep.
So like everything about it made sense.
And what I will say about the first movie too, or as the whole series, as we get close to the end here, is the other thing is that they just like accepted the time travel, like she swapped places. And immediately, the Turtles, Master Splinter, all were just like, oh, she just traveled through time. Let's go back and save her. And it was like, it took 2 seconds for them to go.
Yep.
Like, obviously, they're turtles that became Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So they're kind of like, okay, we believe in some of this craziness in the world. But like, it was just immediately like time travel exists. And immediately they were just like, let's go back and save her. We can do this. It's easy. We can do this. And it's like, just immediately, I'm like, okay, no one thought about this at all. Had a discussion about what the hell just happened. They're immediately just like, okay, let's hold on to this thing and we'll go back in time. And I was like, okay, you're trying to push too much stuff into a movie and you just have to go past some of the realistic part of it. And they just shoved a bunch of stuff into a movie that was all discombobulated all over the place. So that was just weird to me as a overhaul.
And we also, by the third movie, are getting the really goofy Splinter.
Yeah.
Which like a couple of the funny gags are like, haha. But like by the end, it's like all Splinter's doing is acting like a goof, trying to get people to laugh.
Because he said at the end of it was a movie 2 where he's like, I made a funny. That's funny. Like he makes a joke and he makes a point of making a joke. But in the third movie, he's making all kinds of jokes. And
I think he again says, I made a funny in the third one. And I'm like, I know you've already done that.
He's becoming a senile old man in the last.
He is. Yeah. Senile old rat. But yeah, the third one definitely is the one for me that doesn't really stand up. I enjoyed it. Although I have to say, as we're transitioning to that, one thing that really, through how weirdly those movies change, they try to keep continuity. Like they try to bring in ideas of the backstory. You know, the first movie, we have the original lair. The second movie, we have them building the subway station lair.
Yep.
And then by the third movie, we have the full-fledged subway, lair that's tricked out and looks cool now. So they do enough that at least makes you feel like you're trying to create some kind of full story here. And so that really stood out to me at the end, because I did not really, when I was young and watching those, care.
Yeah.
And so now I was kind of like, man, they really were trying to keep those pieces together though. And that is, that's a positive for sure.
And that's funny because they don't want to, like, they're talking about staying back in, or we're talking about like, who was it? April O'Neil. She was going on vacation and how they were upset for living in the sewer. And how they, like, when they didn't want to go back to the future because they live in a sewer. And as a kid, and even as this time, I'm like, that'd be a badass place to live. I want to live there. Like, are you kidding me? Decommissioned subway station? That'd be freaking awesome.
That second one's no joke, man. The second one's got that that antique subway car that they have their living quarters in. Yeah. I was like you. I was like, are you kidding me?
I want to live here.
You want to stay in feudal Japan?
where there's like, and then I love it. Donatello's like, you think I could live without a microchip in my life? Like,
Yeah.
are you serious right now? Oh, indoor plumbing. Obviously, for turtles, might be a little bit different, but
it might be. Ooh, we've never plumbed the depths of that, but one day.
Exactly. Yeah, that'd be a funny story about all the different things like that. Second movie was more family friendly, right? They made it more family friendly. They made the characters themselves in this movie like fun loving, like, you know, like the turtles themselves were like happy go lucky, and the four people who came and swapped positions with them were all like funny and goofy kind of ninjas. But the funny thing is, the third movie had more weapons than any other movie out of the three.
Yep.
Guns and cannons and people getting blown up and fighting.
Oh yeah, big time.
Buildings on fire. And at the very beginning of the movie, I don't know if you picked this up, and it's the first time I've ever picked it up, but they're looking in the bags of the gifts that April brought them. And it might have been Michelangelo looks in one of the bags and goes, I'm not peeking, I'm spelunking for pornography. Porn mags or something like that. It was like, okay, they went from the first movie to the second movie where they were like, the second movie needs to be more family friendly, to the point where maybe the second movie was $25 million budget, only made 75 or 78. Yep. And they're like, well, we need to go back to the original format by making it more non-family friendly, by adding these things in there, and it didn't work. It seemed, like I said, if you watch them all in a row, and if we talk about the three movies as a whole, it just seemed like they were all over the place. Like they didn't have, they have the continuity part that you're talking about, right? But there's still this aspect of like, they didn't know which direction they wanted to go, family friendly, gritty, you know, weapons, no weapons, and all this different stuff. And it was just like, the third movie to me at that point was like a war movie, not like a Saving Private Ryan war movie, but like it was like,
right. Sure.
There's a lot more battling and fighting in it that I've ever seen in any of the three movies. And it was just kind of funny how different 2 and 3 were in that aspect of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's something I'll touch on, but one thing that's interesting always coming back as an adult and looking at these is how differently like I think about them now. And really, like when it was all said and done and I'd seen all three, what really kind of blew my mind was like, I then started thinking about the Batman movies and how both of these really kind of fall into this very end of the 80s window. And it's bizarre, right? I mean, 1989, we have the Berlin Wall falling. Yep. A year later, we're at least as a society saying that the Cold War is over. Nirvana is starting to drop some of its early records. Mainstream culture music is changing. Frank Miller's just happened mid 80s, and we're grappling with that still. And what you see is like Turtles and Batman are both born out of this thing. They come in, the first one they make, they're like, let's lean heavy into the comics. That's where the real writing work has been done. They make these very dark, brooding films that what I also think is, is they're a little bit generational. I think the older crowd was into Batman, the younger crowd was more, but they were getting this same kind of thing. And bam, then like the 90s hits, that's done. We want cartoonish, fun, bright colors, ridiculous comedy, just over the top music. And I never had thought about that before, but watching those three movies was like this little microcosm of the transition from the 80s to the 90s. And it was just as bewildering and jarring as I remember it being. Like, what just happened? Like, I just found this thing I loved.
Yes, I love how you're relating this to those like the Batman and all that stuff. But the fun thing to me was, and Taylor pointed it out to me also, and just kind of made me dive into it, is I see a lot of similarities in 1, 2, and 3 of Turtles as I do in Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3. Like if you look at it, number 1 is like what number 1 is classic. Those three are far. I'm sorry to say, but number 1 for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is amazing. All 3 Back to the Future movies to me are always amazing, but. And maybe one of these days we'll do a Back to the Future trilogy talk. But that number 2 was okay, a little bit like, okay, we see where you're going, but it wasn't as good as 1. And number 3, they go to Old West. So it's like, it's the same idea where they jumped ship and was like, okay, we're done doing Hill Valley in this time. Obviously it's Hill Valley because they that's the whole point of the movie. But like, they do this Old West Hill Valley, which is completely different looking than anything else. Because even the futuristic Hill Valley didn't look that much different than the original, like the 60s Hill Valley. It was different, but not, it was, you can't go future, you can't make it look that much different. Flying cars, obviously, and stuff like that. But like Hill Valley in the West looked completely different. So the same thing with the feudal Japan was like, it could look completely different. It was like, okay, we did number one, we did number two. Now let's just go off the rails and go all the way back in time to some sort of time where there isn't indoor plumbing, where there isn't, you know, refrigeration and electricity and all that stuff. And that's what they did in this movie. So I can see some similarities. We're like, okay, that someone in the offices for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies were like, oh, look what they did over at Back to the Future, because that would have been right around the same time. And we did the exact same thing.
And that's what brought the Batman in for me, was like, you know, Michael Keaton Batman was like shocking to people, like what this thing was. Then Batman Returns came out, and I remember being like, okay, like you're doing it different, but I'm with you. I see what you're doing. And then Batman Forever comes out, and people are like, all right, you're losing me. And it does the same thing. It leans into the Jim Carrey, the bright colors, the goofy. So I don't know what's, like I said, I really think it's just all of this crap from the 80s is ending, and people want a different aesthetic now. And unfortunately, that's not a good place to be when you're starting a trilogy.
Yes. And and that's forever. But I still think, you know, as a whole series of watching the movie, we watched them. Adam and I talked about this for a couple of weeks. I watched 1 and 2 pretty much back to back. I watched number 3 last night, but they were close enough that they all transitioned into each other pretty well. They're not super long. They're not super hard to watch. They're worth the package. Like if you had to choose one and you only watch one, then you don't get a chance to watch 2 and 3. I don't think you'd be sad. I don't think the world would be over for you. I think you could get on without doing it. But I do think that they have this time in place for all 3 of those films. They each have their own individual positives. They each have their own individual negatives. None of them are by far anywhere perfect. There is this aspect of nostalgia for us. Like there is this throwback that I remember this from a kid, you know, showing this to my son in a couple of years when he's old enough. He might not care as much as I would because of the way that it works and technology and the effects and all that stuff. But I do think there's enough people, 35 to 41, 42, 45-year-old people in our generation that would watch a remake of these movies with people in suits. And like you mentioned, even if it has Casey Jones, Elias comes back as Casey Jones as an older person. Even if it is that, honestly, tug on our heartstrings, have Master Splinter die in the movie. Like, have this be that he's too old, and that's the reason they're avenging his death in this movie. Make it a little bit more gritty, not for kids. Put it on Netflix or Hulu or HBO Max or whatever kind of connection you can get out there. And make this movie for us, like they did with, honestly, it's not obviously the same. They made Men in Black 4 for the people who watched Men in Black back in the day. They didn't make it for current people or for younger people. They made Toy Story 4 for us, the people who watched Toy Story when we were younger. They need to make a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for us, not for the Nickelodeon crowd when Nickelodeon bought them.
I know, and I feel like, and I don't want to tell y'all to make Last Ronin into a movie or a series, but
they do, but yeah.
But no, I'm joking. Like I'm saying, like that's, as we talk about this, I'm like, the Last Ronin is so like perfect for our, like you said, for the people that have been invested from the beginning, because it has all of those aspects that started with the movie and the cartoon and the comics and the, so yeah, I mean, something like that would, I think, especially now with the little bit of momentum with Turtles.
Yes. And for you and I, and we talked on the Marvel versus DC side that I'm not huge into the dark, gritty comic book stuff. Like, I think there's a place for it. And I'm always saying that's the problem with Marvel or DC. And you said the same thing. It's like DC has this thing about dark, deep, you know, aesthetics to their comic book movies.
Always.
And there was something that was a mixture of both in number 1 for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that kind of faded away in 2 and 3. But I feel like they could get back into that and doing that. Because, I mean, let's be honest, the very first comic book by Laird and Eastman and Laird was dark and gritty. And let's do that. And honestly, it'd be fun as hell if they did episodes like a Netflix series that was a 6 or 7 or 10 part series, and they did the Last Ronin series. And one of the episodes was an homage and was just in black and white, or all the throwback scenes, because obviously in the Last Ronin, don't want to give out who it is if you haven't read it, but there's only one turtle left. All the other ones have passed away. Splinter's passed away, and it's this one turtle left, kind of avenging the death of his brothers. Is all those flashback scenes that you have all 4 turtles in, make those in black and white to pay homage to the original comic book being in black and white. And
in Last Ronin, our flashbacks drawn by Aren't some of the
flashbacks are
flashbacks
drawn by Ben Bishop,
by,
which is
by Ben
from Maine.
Bishop?
So
That's what it was. Yeah, but still, that idea of like using a different
and
style,
Eastman and Laird have written Eastman and Laird wrote the
exactly
overarching story of Last Ronin.
Yep.
Eastman's writing the books currently, like as they go issue to issue,
right?
And Eastman has some segments of the movie that he draws himself. So it's the two brothers that drew the actual comic book, and then Ben Bishop does the flashbacks, and then then Eastman has done some other type of flashbacks as well. But there's this way you can make the show to the point, and I think it would be perfect as a show. A movie would be great, but I think a show would do well. I think an HBO Max type show where you can show grittiness. Honestly, it's got to the point where Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is not a teenager anymore. He's older. He's an adult. And so let him swear. Let him have there be blood and have, people die. And like I said, if you actually had them avenging a death of their brothers or Splinter or something, then it is one of those cool. I think it was something that, I'm in this group called the Bish Kids with Ben Bishop. We're in this Discord group together. There's over 200 people in this group now. 195, if not more, of those are adults. So if you think about the aspect of people being fans of the Turtles nowadays, yes, obviously these kids, it's owned by Nickelodeon. So like the kids there's kids' toys for Turtles nowadays. There's animated shows. There's the movies that are coming out nowadays. Make those for the kids. Make something that pays homage to our early 90s movies, the early 90s or late 80s cartoons, the original comic books, and do something for us. Because I feel like it would make $200 million if it was in the theaters. Easily.
Oh my God.
Make $200 million.
I mean, and we haven't seen, like you said, now we could still use physical suits. They would be so much better. We can correct some of this. Like, as we had said back in the first movie, they filmed largely that dark kind of set because it hit a lot of the mistakes. Now we can see what we can really do. As a series, I think it would absolutely just kill it. But they've got to bring back Elias as Casey Jones.
Yes. And you could also do the mixture of a suit with it's a flat mouth on the suit with motion capture things on it, and you motion capture the mouth. So then you make it more realistic. So the mouth's actually moving, more believable, more amazing on that aspect. But the suit itself, there was something about it. And the only way I'd say I'd be okay and sign off on it, not that they're asking my approval or opinion, is if they were to make the CGI look like the suits. That's the only way I could see it. If you motion captured and then it looks like the suits, you didn't make it look like the current ones. The current, the Michael Bay movies, there's something about those turtles. They just look fake. The turtles themselves looked like the animated turtles from
the they're show. Just not. You can try to reimagine the turtles. I think we had talked about this with somebody the other day. Any way you want. Like the Michael Bay movie as a sit down, watch it beginning to end. It's fun. It's adventure. The turtles are way too big.
Yes.
Of a cultural icon to change. You can't do it. You have the cartoon turtles, the comic turtles, and the first movie turtles. Those are the turtles.
And that's the way you've always seen it. We've seen it in comic books as general. Their artist moves from artist to artist to artist, but Batman is relatively drawn the same way in each comic book. Like there's a way to draw Batman, there's a way to draw Superman. There is this envisioning. The one thing I will say about the turtles over the span of the turtles being drawn from Mirage to IDW and all this stuff is they do change, and everybody has their own aesthetic to way they make the turtles look, but there's still a basic look to a turtle nowadays. Like Ben Bishop's turtles looks like a turtle, and Kevin Eastman's turtle looks like his turtle, but they still have this basic overall arching. This is what a turtle looks like. The original, like, think about it. You've seen it. The original drawing that Kevin Eastman drew of the turtles looks completely different than a turtle looks nowadays. But that was the original drawing, and it's morphed over the time. But now it was years ago, years and years ago that changed. It was immediately after that, honestly, that changed, because that drawing was a first drawing. But it's morphed into a way that the turtle looks a certain way. And I picture in my mind the turtles from the animated show, the turtles from the current comic books, and the turtles from this movies.
Well, it's a great. This is actually Tim Veitch. This was a limited run, but that's still.
It still has the aesthetic of what a turtle looks like. Yes. Also, the other one is that more yellow. In the third movie, their undercarriage here was like this brown color. Like it wasn't yellow.
Yes.
like that. I would love
Yep.
this to be yellow. It's the same thing I'd love for them to make an ingenious way when they introduce the X-Men into the Marvel Cinematic Universe to introduce in some sort of way the yellow and blue costumes. So I want that
Yes.
almost comic booky looking thing
Yep.
to it. And even if they did the TV show like this, if they go to the flashbacks look like that.
Right.
The current character is more dark and gritty, so he doesn't. It's all worn away now. It's stained. It's scratched. It's scarred, and
Yep.
gritty. But like have the flashbacks be more bubbly and like remembering his fun times. Again, I don't want to give away who the Last Ronin is if you haven't read it.
No.
End of this year, hopefully, we will be talking the Last Ronin on another comic book, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles episode, because the final issue will be coming out, and hopefully we'll be able to do a little couple episodes on that, a little wrap up of us reading it, and then have some special guests on to talk about the actual comic book as well. But as an overarching thing, watch these movies. They're on HBO Max.
Yes,
we talked about it last week. They're on HBO Max. You can watch them if you have a subscription. Go and buy them. Like they're available on DVD. Actually, that's funny.
Exactly.
That is it TMNT 3 was the final Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie of all time. So even the newer ones, it was available on VHS. So like
I believe
the next three, the remakes or whatever, the newer ones, the CGI and Michael Bay movies, those are all only available on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever.
Oh yeah.
The last TMNT movie to be available on VHS was TMNT 3 back in 1993, which is kind of cool. Also the retro part of it. So if you really want to get retro and nostalgic on it, buy them on VHS, throw them in your VCR and watch them on VHS.
This is like my dream lately that I keep bugging my wife about is I want like a period TV with a refurbished period VCR. And I'm just going to go around and buy VHS tapes at thrift shops and watch them all the time because I agree. There's something it doesn't work on the big flat screens.
No,
like it wasn't made for them.
Maybe we'll get to that point. Because of the fact that, I have a record player now and I listen to vinyl all the time. Maybe we'll actually get to that point where we actually want to go back and VCRs are not cheap to buy right now, dude.
No,
like if you try to buy them on eBay, they're $50 or $60.
Get one for our studio.
Yes, exactly. That'd be fun.
We could do some real cool viewings on like an old, what we need to do, go to find ourselves an old big screen TV from one of those projection ones. Yeah, that'd be fun.
That would be fun.
But like Justin was saying though, man, if you watch all of them, but if you haven't seen one, like it's a stand-up movie, and even if it's not your favorite thing, even I had forgotten until I really went back through this. What a big deal that was culturally. Like you need to at least see it. Like that movie was huge,
and it was innovative. Like I said,
big time.
I have it in every single one of these notes I have for each movie. Flipping and doing ninja stuff, karate and stuff like that in those suits. I will always pay respect to those 10 or 12 or 13, whoever the people were that did the suits in each individual movie, because they were all different. Now the benefit of having suits is you didn't have to have the same characters playing the same things. There was no delineation in my mind. Michelangelo in movie 2 was my favorite voice, but that's because it stood out just far enough. The rest of them, you would never have known that there were different characters playing the different people. Like that was good enough.
Actually have martial artists doing, that's fantastic. That part in the documentary where he's like, and then I all of a sudden was like, hey guys, we can just use stuntmen.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden they were like, okay, we can do this.
Yep. And you in their contracts, the unions in Hollywood, one person can do up to 3 voiceovers for animated films or for films under the same pay as they can for one voice. So you could actually get someone to voice 3 of the turtles for the price of one voicing person, and then get cheaper stuntmen to do the other thing. So it would cost you less if the actual suits cost more to do than the CGI. Because that's part of it nowadays, is that sometimes those suits are more expensive and shooting sucks and all this other stuff to do it. So I would just love Jim Henson to come back, or the Henson production company to come back and do the suits and all of that. Let's go nostalgic on this. Let's bring it back to the original 90s. Yeah. This is the time to do it though. That's the thing. 10 years from now, it may be nostalgic of the 90s might be past. We've talked about it over on a brewing company that like the tubular theme is awesome right now, but 5 years from now, someone could give 2 shits about 1990s Saved by the Bells type theme. It could probably
be 2000s.
It could be aging itself out. So I think there's something to say about making something in the next 5 years of a 90s throwback, doing it. And you could even extend it. It could be the movie 4, keep the storyline going. And it's just the 4th movie. And it happens to be a couple of years later, and this movie's still based in the 90s. Like you still could do that.
Honestly, that would be the brilliant way to do it. It would be kind of like that, the way Star Wars cleaned up some of their canon, which is like, nope, leave all that in place.
Yeah.
We'll do the Mandalorian. It'll bring everything kind of back a little bit, and then we can start anew. But like, if they could do that with Turtles, like you said, don't just keep those 3 movies 100% canon.
Yeah.
And put a cap on it, a brilliant one. But
that'd be fun. So like I said, overall, Adam and I are in agreement on this. This is a series to watch. All 3 of them is worth watching. It does go back. Like it does, you might get less enthusiastic about watching the movies as they go along, but they all have their own place in time and they all have their own story that's great. And it's worth, they capture your attention the entire time. It's not like you're getting bored through the movies. They all have something to watch. There's fun things to do about it. And they're classic. And that's the thing. So they'll always be classic to me. And all 3 of the movies be worth watching. Every time I watch number 1, I watch number 2 and 3 and always will.
Yep.
There's never a time where I'm going to watch number 1. And then even if you and I got together with our wives and you're like, oh, let's watch number 1, you and I would probably go home afterwards. And over the next few days, watch 2 and 3, just so you can complete the cycle of the 3 movies. I have not seen the most recent Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies that come out.
I haven't either.
I've seen the first one of the remakes, but everything out are the remakes, the next edition. But so I will watch some of these, and I guess they're coming out with another one at some point too. And so we'll watch those, and maybe we'll do a different one of how they're relating them to these ones. But right now, the classic movies are still deep in my heart as the best Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Agreed. And this is the time to watch them because, like I said, with everything going on right now, like that's going to be your quickest way to tap in to what Ronan is talking about.
Yeah. Exactly. And so to tie this in and wrap this up, this is kind of a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles kind of thing going on here, is that you can meet Judith Hoag at the Bangor Comic and Toy Con on October 1st through the 3rd, coming in as April O'Neil. To also tie that in, you can sit there and take a picture with her in the sewer layer, because Feature Presentations is going to be there. They have a whole set that looks like a part of the sewer layer for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is pretty cool. And even to tie it even more, Steve Levine, one of the original artists for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Jim Lawson, again, one of the original artists for Mirage Studios for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Ben Bishop, who does current Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle stuff. And then a couple of the other artists that are going to be there have done Last Ronin variants and other Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles variants. So at Comic-Con this year, if you're in the greater Bangor area or all over the state of Maine, come up to this Comic-Con because you can meet a bunch of the people who were involved in the early Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles things at the Bangor Mall, which is pretty fun. So we're excited for that for sure.
And it's huge. I mean, these guys are legends. Like some of these early TMNT drawers. I mean, if you're a fan artist or fan of any of the art with like the group coming is amazing. Like I said, I almost have a nerdgasm every time I think about it. Like,
and Turtle Power, the definitive story, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles history. That's the documentary we're talking about. You can find that online too. That's well worth watching too, and that actually brings into light some of these characters, some of these guys too, Steve Levine and Jim Lawson too, because they're part of that storyline at Mirage Studios back in the day that started here in New England, which is where we are. And then so otherwise, you can catch these episodes. You know, last week's episode with Paul Eaton of Galactic Comics gave us a little update about his shop. And talk that. Next week, we're going to talk Clerks because, again, we're trying to get this whole preparedness for the Comic-Con that's coming up. So we're going to rewatch and review Clerks. There'll be one movie review. And that's more, it's obviously not comic book specific related, but I think we can tie some things in there. Like Kevin Smith sold his comic book collection to make the movie. It's also a pop culture style thing. And that would be
and I'm going to drop the bomb on you now. I have never seen Clerks.
See?
I don't know what I don't know what it's about. I don't know anything other than Kevin Smith, and that's it. I have no idea what the Clerks is about.
That's perfect because that will bring it all in. I watched it a few times. I love the history. I love Kevin Smith. I listen to his podcast a lot. So there's that aspect of bringing in someone who's just watched it for the first time and have me watching it again.
I'm excited to watch it for the first time. Sometimes I love when I haven't seen a movie for like 20 years after it came out. It's fun to watch it for a first time.
And I think it still holds up. It's, again, one of those movies that did okay when it was first released, but is now actually in, like, it's put into the, what's it called? The Library of Congress, whatever, where they put, like, it's a historical significance of an independent film. And so that's fun about it too. So we'll watch that next week and talk about that next week so we can discuss getting ready for the Clerks reunion at the Bangor Comic and Toy Con in Bangor, Maine. So that'd be fun. But until then, you can subscribe and follow to us on Facebook Facebook and Instagram for social media at Capes and Tights Podcast. Twitter, again, it's fairly new. We're still grabbing the followers there, but that's Capes Tights Pod. And then you can subscribe, follow on Apple and Spotify and all your major podcasting platforms. But if you subscribe or follow on Apple, you can also review and rate the podcast. 5 stars is welcome. If you have any questions about the podcast, reach out to us. Capes and Tights at summitmedia.com. We're going to change that here pretty soon because I would like to get a Capes and Tights podcast. I just haven't got a chance to make it yet. It's SOMOUNT media.com, just so you know. It's on the show notes as well on the podcasting platforms. If you want to email us and reach out. If you want to reach out to something that's a little bit easier, hello@themainstateofmind.com. You can also get to us there and talk to us, or you can message us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We'll get the messages from you and talk about TMNT. And so, yeah, so follow us and rate us and review us and all that stuff. Capes and Tights podcast, or capesandtights.com is also an easy way to get all of that information. For sure.
Absolutely.
But definitely watch it. HBO Max has all the movies on there. I'm hoping some of you guys own the movies because they're definitely well worth it having in your library. And watch them and let us know what you guys think too. So if you want to be prepared for next week, watch Clerks as well, so that you're ready to listen to the movie review before you actually see that. So you're not watching the movie for the first time after you've heard our review of the movie, because we are going to spoil it. Any of these reviews we're going to do, by the way, are going to spoil the movie. I don't want to do reviews that don't spoil the movie. So in the future, anytime you listen to a podcast, it's about a review of a movie, we're going to spoil the movie. I'm sorry. Like, that's just the way it is. I don't like reviews that don't spoil.
I don't think it's fun if you don't.
No. So it's just like watching a trailer. You might as well just watch the trailer. A review with you don't spoil the movie is the same as a trailer. So
that's the brilliance about days like today too, is that with TMNT, if you haven't seen it by now, not my problem.
There is a time frame where if you haven't seen it, then there's no more. Like, honestly, I honestly think nowadays in pop culture, comic book movies, you have a year. If someone hasn't seen the movie within a year, you're either not going to see it, or it's not my responsibility to stop you from being spoiled from it. So, we're doing that, and we'll do that with our reviews of current movies. We are going to do some reviews of, like, we are going to do a Shang-Chi review. We're going to do Eternals review. We're going to do these comic book related movies reviews, but we're planning to do them the 45-day window after the movie's released, where it will be on streaming services. Because we're thinking to ourselves, it's probably better to have the majority of people who want to watch the movie have seen the movie before we listen to the review. My buddies over at the Friends from Work podcast released their Shang-Chi review last week. I have yet to see the movie because I haven't had time. And so I'm waiting to listen to that episode. So if they would have released it when it's on streaming, I would have listened to it immediately afterwards. So we're going to do that. That's our plan for now, is to wait. Maybe in the future, a year from now, we'll do it. We'll go see it opening weekend. We'll schedule some time to do that. But as of right now, what the majority of the people who are trying to be safe and responsible to be able to see the movie. So the Shang-Chi movie will come out sometime in November, I believe, because that would be 45 days after it hit the theaters, or sometime in October. But that's what we're doing. That's our plan for movie review. So this has been the TMNT original movie review. I hope you guys liked it. Again, subscribe and follow and reach out to us. I'm Justin. This is the Capes and Tights podcast.
I'm Adam.
Have a good one, guys.
Thanks.